Today's story, The Swineherd. Once upon a time there was a poor prince. He was very kind and handsome, and many fine ladies would have been happy to marry him. But the prince only wished to marry the emperor's beautiful daughter. She, on the other hand, had other ideas. "You're far too poor," she said. "You might own a palace and have enough money for an ordinary girl, but you just don't have any gold to keep me in the jewels and gifts I deserve." And with that she pushed him out of her father's palace and told him not to come calling on her again. The prince might not have been as rich as your average prince, but he had two things far better than gold. Firstly, he had a rose bush that grew a single rose every 5 years. Its perfume smelled so wonderful that anyone who sniffed it was filled with joy. The second thing was a nightingale, whose voice was so sweet that anyone who heard it felt kindness and love. The prince decided to give these two things to the emperor's daughter. He was sure that as soon as she saw them, she would want to become his bride. He packed them in two wooden caskets and delivered them himself. The emperor's daughter opened the first casket. When she took out the rose, she threw it down in disgust. "It's just a smelly old rose," she cried. Its perfume didn't fill her with joy. She opened the second casket, and out flew the nightingale. As it began to sing, the emperor and his courtiers clapped their hands with glee. But the emperor's daughter just frowned. "Why would I want a silly old bird?" she asked, for the nightingale's song didn't fill her with kindness and love. She had the prince thrown from her father's palace. "As if I'd marry anyone who gave me such silly gifts," she shouted, throwing the wooden caskets out of the window. Although the prince was upset, he still wanted to marry the emperor's daughter. The next day he dressed as a beggar and called at the palace looking for work. "I have just the job for you," said the emperor, looking at the prince's ragged clothes. "I need someone to look after my pigs." So the beggar prince became the royal swineherd. Each morning he tended the pigs, and each afternoon he sat outside his hut making things. One afternoon he made a silver cooking pot covered in golden bells. When the pot boiled, the silver bells tinkled a little tune. When the emperor's daughter saw the silver pot and heard the lovely tune it tinkled, she wanted it for herself. She sent her servant to ask the swineherd what he wanted for the pot. 10 kisses from the emperor's daughter," replied the swineherd. The emperor's daughter was furious. "How dare he?" she shouted. But when the bells began to tinkle once more, she marched to where the swineherd sat. "Very well, you shall have your kisses," she said, "but I don't want to be seen by anyone." She made a group of servants gather round her, and the swineherd got his 10 kisses. He should have been happy, but he couldn't help thinking that the emperor's daughter was spoiled. The next day the swineherd made a beautiful golden rattle. When it was swung in the air, it played wonderful tunes. "I must have it," said the emperor's daughter. Once again she sent her servant to find out what the swineherd wanted for it. 100 kisses from the emperor's daughter," he replied. After a little protest, the emperor's daughter agreed. Once again she made her servants gather round while she kissed the swineherd. As the servants counted the kisses, the swineherd couldn't help thinking that perhaps the emperor's daughter was too spoilt and greedy to make a good wife. But before he had time to say anything, the emperor, who happened to be walking by, spotted the gaggle of servants gathered in a circle around the swineherd's hut. "What's going on here?" he demanded. As you can imagine, he was furious when he discovered that his daughter was being kissed by the swineherd. "How dare you!" he shouted, and straightway had his daughter and the swineherd thrown out of the palace. The emperor's daughter stamped her foot and cried, "If only I had married the handsome prince who gave me the rose and the nightingale," she wailed. The swineherd disappeared for a moment, then reappeared dressed as a prince. The prince looked sadly at the emperor's daughter. "I'm sorry," he said, "but I don't think I can marry you. You are just too silly. After all, you didn't want my lovely rose and nightingale, but were willing to kiss a swineherd for the sake of a few glittering trinkets." Then, with a sad farewell, he went back to his little old kingdom. And as for the emperor's daughter, well, her father eventually let her back into the palace, but only after she's promised never to be so silly again. Thank you, children. Hope you've enjoyed this story. Good night and sweet dreams.